My house. My little slice of heaven. I loved everything about it, from the bright yellow door to the slightly crooked mailbox. But if I'm honest, the best part was definitely the pool. It wasn't huge, but it was perfect for cooling off on hot summer days. I spent hours floating on my back, watching the clouds drift by, and pretending I was on vacation. The water shimmered, the sun warmed my skin, and all was right with the world. I took care of that pool. I scooped out every leaf, tested the chemicals every week, and made sure the water was always sparkling clean. It was my happy place, my oasis, my escape from the everyday craziness. We'd moved in about 3 years ago, and quickly settled into a routine. The neighborhood was pretty quiet, mostly families and retired folks. Everyone was friendly enough, waving hello as they drove by, but we didn't really socialize much. That was fine by me. I liked my peace and quiet. I liked being able to relax in my backyard without having to worry about making small talk. Then there was Brenda. Brenda lived 3 houses down and was the president of the HOA. Everyone called her HOA Karen, though not to her face, of course. She had a reputation for being particular. She'd send out emails about the length of our grass, the color of our trash cans, and the way we parked our cars. Little things, mostly, but they added up. It felt like she was always watching, always judging. I tried to stay out of her way as much as possible, but it was hard when she seemed to have a vendetta against anything that brought joy to the neighborhood. Once, she even complained about the inflatable flamingo I had in my pool. "It's not in keeping with the aesthetic of the community," she'd sniffed. The first sign of trouble came at the monthly HOA meeting. These meetings were usually a snooze fest, but I always went, just to stay informed. Brenda was droning on about some new landscaping regulations when she suddenly cleared her throat and announced, "My son, Chad, is getting married next month." Everyone clapped politely. Chad was something. He still lived at home and drove a beat-up pickup truck that he loved to rev at all hours. I wasn't sure what he did all day. Brenda continued, "We're having the reception at my house, but as you all know, my backyard is rather small." A few knowing glances were exchanged. Brenda's backyard was basically a concrete slab. Then she dropped the bomb. She looked directly at me, a glint in her eye, and said, "So, I was thinking, my wedding guests could use your pool." I stared at Brenda, my mouth agape. Did she really just say that? My pool? For her son's wedding guests? It felt like a punch to the gut. All the happy thoughts I usually associated with my backyard oasis vanished, replaced by a surge of anger and disbelief. Brenda, bless her heart, didn't seem to notice my stunned silence. She just kept going, oblivious to the outrage she was causing. "It would be such a help," she chirped, adjusting her perfectly coiffed hair. "And it would really add a touch of elegance to the affair." Elegance? Chad's wedding? In my pool? The image that flashed through my mind was anything but elegant. I pictured a bunch of rowdy wedding guests splashing around, spilling drinks, and leaving a trail of wet towels and discarded pool toys in their wake. My perfect pool, ruined. Before I could even formulate a coherent response, Brenda barreled on. "Of course, we'd make sure everyone was properly supervised," she added, though her tone suggested this was more of an afterthought than a genuine concern. "And we'd be sure to clean up afterwards." Right. Because Chad's wedding guests were known for their impeccable manners and cleaning habits. I finally found my voice. "Brenda," I said, trying to keep my tone polite, "I appreciate the thought, but I'm really not comfortable with that. My pool is, well, it's private. I don't really want a bunch of strangers using it." Brenda's smile faltered, just for a second, before hardening into a disapproving frown. "Oh, come now," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't be difficult. It's just for a few hours. And it would really mean a lot to Chad." Chad. Always Chad. "I understand that," I said, but I still have to decline. It's my property, and I'm not comfortable opening it up to a large group of people. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Brenda's eyes narrowed, and her voice took on a sharp edge. "Well, I'm not sure you understand the situation," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "As president of the HOA, I have a certain amount of influence. And it wouldn't be difficult to find a few minor violations of the rules on your property." A threat. She was threatening me. Over my pool. For Chad's wedding. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. "Are you threatening me, Brenda?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm simply suggesting," she said, her voice now a thin, icy blade, "that it would be in your best interest to cooperate." That was it. The gloves were off. The war had begun. And Brenda, HOA Karen, had just picked a fight with the wrong person. My pool was going to stay mine. And Chad's wedding guests were going to find somewhere else to splash around. The ride home from the HOA meeting was a blur. I was fuming. Brenda's audacity, her entitlement, the sheer nerve of the woman. It was unbelievable. I replayed the conversation in my head, each time getting angrier and angrier. Who did she think she was, waltzing in and demanding access to my property? And then threatening me when I refused? It was outrageous. Brenda had been a thorn in my side since day one. It started small, of course. A passive-aggressive email about my flower beds being too wild. I liked wildflowers, okay? Then came the notice about my trash cans being left out for too long. Apparently, 15 minutes was an egregious violation. And let's not forget the saga of the Christmas lights. Apparently, blinking lights were a safety hazard, and had to be replaced with static ones. Seriously? Each incident was minor on its own, but they added up. It felt like Brenda was constantly scrutinizing my every move, looking for an excuse to exert her authority. It wasn't just me, either. I'd heard whispers from other neighbors about similar run-ins with HOA Karen. Mrs. Henderson got a warning for having a slightly overgrown rose bush. Mr. Peterson was cited for parking his truck on the street for more than 2 hours. It was a reign of terror, disguised as community management. Brenda thrived on control. She loved being in charge, loved having the power to dictate what everyone else could and couldn't do. And now, she was trying to extend her reach to my pool. Over my dead body. I pulled into my driveway, slammed the car door, probably another HOA violation, and marched straight to my backyard. The pool shimmered in the afternoon sun, oblivious to the drama that was unfolding. I sat down on one of the lounge chairs, took a deep breath, and tried to calm myself. Okay, I thought. Time to strategize. I couldn't let Brenda get away with this. I had to protect my pool, my sanctuary, my little slice of heaven. But how? I couldn't just barricade myself in my house and refuse to answer the door. That would only escalate things. I needed a plan. A brilliant, foolproof plan that would send a clear message to Brenda without landing me in jail or getting me kicked out of the HOA. This was war, all right. But I was going to win. And Brenda, HOA Karen, was about to learn that messing with my pool was a very, very bad idea. The first step. Call in the reinforcements. It was time to gather my friends and brainstorm some serious revenge. Sweet, sweet revenge. My friends, Sarah and Emily, arrived armed with pizza and a healthy dose of righteous indignation. They'd both had their own run-ins with Brenda, so they were more than happy to help me plot my revenge. Okay, spill, Sarah said, grabbing a slice of pepperoni. What exactly did HOA Karen say? I recounted the events of the HOA meeting, emphasizing Brenda's audacity and her thinly veiled threat. Sarah and Emily listened intently, their eyes widening with each detail. That's insane. Emily exclaimed, shaking her head. She can't just demand to use your pool. It's your property. Tell me about it, I said, taking a bite of pizza. I told her no, but she threatened to find HOA violations on my property. The nerve. Sarah said, slamming her fist on the coffee table. We have to do something. We can't let her get away with this. We spent the next hour brainstorming ideas, ranging from the mildly annoying to the downright illegal. Sarah suggested planting a bunch of weeds in Brenda's meticulously manicured lawn. Emily proposed anonymously signing Brenda up for every junk mail list imaginable. I even briefly considered filling Brenda's mailbox with glitter, the ultimate petty revenge. Those are all good, I said, but I want something bigger. Something that will really send a message. Okay, let's think, Emily said, tapping her chin. What does Brenda value most? Control, Sarah and I said in unison. Exactly, Emily said. So, we need to do something that takes away her control. Something that throws a wrench in her plans. We pondered this for a while, munching on pizza and sipping soda. Then, suddenly, Sarah's eyes lit up. I've got it, she exclaimed. You should fill your pool with something unexpected. Unexpected? I asked, intrigued. Like what? Like Jello. Sarah said, grinning mischievously. Emily and I stared at her in disbelief. Jello? As in, the jiggly dessert? Think about it, Sarah said, her voice filled with excitement. It's completely harmless, but it would render your pool unusable. And it would be hilarious. The more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea. It was ridiculous, it was unexpected, and it would definitely send a message to Brenda. Plus, the image of her face when she discovered my Jello-filled pool was too good to resist. I'm in, I said, a smile spreading across my face. Let's fill my pool with Jello. The plan was hatched. Operation Jello Pool was a go. Now all we had to do was figure out how to buy enough Jello to fill an entire swimming pool. This was going to be interesting. And very, very sticky. The next morning, we set out on our Jello buying adventure. We figured we'd need a lot of Jello, so we decided to hit up every grocery store in a 20-mile radius. We started at the Mega Mart, armed with a shopping cart the size of a small car. The first challenge was finding enough Jello. The shelves were stocked, but not with the sheer quantity we required. We cleared out the entire supply of every flavor they had, strawberry, lime, lemon, orange, even the weird blue raspberry stuff. We piled box after box into the cart, until it was overflowing. The cashier looked at us with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. Having a party? She asked, scanning the endless stream of Jello boxes. Something like that, I said, trying to suppress a giggle. We paid for our massive Jello haul, which cost a small fortune, and loaded it into my SUV. It barely fit. The back seat was completely filled, and we had to stack boxes on the floor in the front. Next stop, Super Saver. Emily announced, consulting her phone. We repeated the process at Super Saver, then at Grocery Outlet, and finally at the little corner store down the street. By the end of the day, we had amassed a Jello collection that would make Willy Wonka jealous. My SUV was practically groaning under the weight of all that gelatin. We returned to my house, exhausted but triumphant. The backyard looked like a Jello factory had exploded. Boxes were stacked everywhere. The pool, usually a sparkling oasis, now seemed like a giant, empty canvas waiting to be filled with fruity, jiggly goodness. Okay, Sarah said, surveying the scene. Time to get to work. We started by calculating the volume of my pool. We measured the length, width, and depth, and then did some complicated math, thank you, Google. We determined that we would need approximately 5,000 gallons of Jello to fill it completely. 5,000 gallons. That was a lot of Jello. We divided into teams. Sarah and Emily were in charge of mixing the Jello, while I was in charge of transporting it to the pool. We set up a production line in the kitchen, using every pot, bowl, and container we could find. We boiled water, added the Jello powder, and stirred until it was dissolved. Then, we carefully poured the mixture into buckets and carried them out to the pool. The process was slow and messy. Jello splashed everywhere. We spilled it on the patio, on the grass, and on ourselves. We were covered in sticky, fruity goo from head to toe. But we kept going, fueled by our determination to thwart Brenda and protect my pool. As the sun began to set, the pool slowly began to transform. The clear water was replaced by a swirling mass of vibrant colors. Strawberry red mixed with lime green, lemon yellow swirled with orange, and the occasional patch of blue raspberry added a touch of surreal whimsy. It looked like a giant, edible Jackson Pollock painting. We were exhausted, sticky, and slightly delirious, but we were also incredibly proud of ourselves. We had accomplished the impossible. We had filled my pool with Jello. Now, all that was left was to wait for Brenda to discover our masterpiece. And I had a feeling she wasn't going to be happy. Not happy at all. The next morning, I woke up with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Today was the day Brenda would discover my Jello masterpiece. I poured myself a cup of coffee and went out to the backyard to admire our handiwork one last time. The pool looked even more impressive in the daylight. The Jello shimmered in the sun, a vibrant, jiggly testament to our rebellious spirit. I knew it wouldn't be long before Brenda made her appearance. Her house was just 3 doors down, and she had a habit of taking early morning walks around the neighborhood, presumably to inspect for HOA violations. I pictured her strolling along, clipboard in hand, when suddenly she'd spot my pool. The look on her face would be priceless. I didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, I heard a blood-curdling scream. It was Brenda. I grabbed my coffee and casually strolled towards the front yard, trying to look as innocent as possible. As I rounded the corner, I saw Brenda standing at the edge of my property, staring at the pool with a look of utter disbelief. Her mouth was agape, her eyes wide with shock. What is this?" she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the Jello-filled pool. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "What is this?" she repeated, her voice rising in pitch. "What have you done to your pool?" "Oh, this?" I said, feigning innocence. "I just decided to try something new. I filled it with Jello." Brenda's face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. "Jello?" she shrieked. "You filled your pool with Jello? Are you insane?" "Maybe a little," I said, shrugging. "But I think it looks rather festive, don't you?" "Festive?" she sputtered. "Festive? This is an outrage. This is a violation of the HOA rules. You can't just fill your pool with Jello." "Actually, I can," I said, calmly. "There's nothing in the HOA guidelines that prohibits filling your pool with Jello." I checked. Brenda was apoplectic. She stomped her foot and clenched her fists. "This is ridiculous," she yelled. "You're doing this to spite me. You're trying to ruin Chad's wedding." "Chad's wedding?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "What does my Jello-filled pool have to do with Chad's wedding?" "You know exactly what it has to do with Chad's wedding," she shrieked. "You know I wanted to use your pool for my guests. And now you've ruined everything." "Brenda," I said, trying to keep a straight face, "I told you I wasn't comfortable with your guests using my pool. That's why I filled it with Jello. It's my pool, and I can do whatever I want with it." Brenda was beyond reason. She started ranting and raving about my lack of consideration, my disrespect for the community, and my general awfulness as a neighbor. I just stood there, sipping my coffee and enjoying the show. Finally, she ran out of steam. She stood there, panting and red-faced, glaring at me with pure hatred. "You haven't heard the last of this," she hissed. "I'm going to report you to the HOA. I'm going to make sure you pay for this." And with that, she stormed off, presumably to plot her revenge. I watched her go, a smile playing on my lips. The battle had been joined. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Later that day, I received a formal-looking letter from the HOA. It was, of course, from Brenda. The letter stated that my Jello-filled pool was a public nuisance and a violation of community standards. It demanded that I drain the pool immediately and return it to its original condition, or face further disciplinary action. I crumpled up the letter and tossed it in the trash. Brenda clearly wasn't going to give up easily. But neither was I. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. I knew Brenda would bring up the Jello pool and try to rally the other neighbors against me. I needed to be prepared. I needed a strategy. I called Sarah and Emily and asked them to come over for another emergency planning session. They arrived with reinforcements, a bottle of wine and a bag of popcorn. "Okay, what's the plan?" Sarah asked, settling onto the couch. I explained the situation, showing them the letter from Brenda. They both rolled their eyes. "She's unbelievable," Emily said. "It's your pool. She can't tell you what to do with it." "I know," I said. "But she's the president of the HOA. She has influence. I need to convince the other neighbors that I'm not the crazy one here." We spent the next few hours brainstorming ideas. We considered drafting a petition to remove Brenda as president of the HOA. We thought about organizing a neighborhood barbecue to win over the other residents. We even briefly entertained the idea of hiring a lawyer to fight Brenda's claims. "Those are all good ideas," Sarah said, "but they're a lot of work. We need something simpler. Something more direct." "Like what?" I asked. "Like a counteroffensive," Emily said, grinning mischievously. "We need to find something Brenda is doing wrong and expose it to the rest of the community." "That's a great idea," I said. "But what could we possibly find? Brenda is so meticulous about following the rules." "Everyone has secrets," Sarah said, winking. "We just need to dig a little deeper." We started by researching the HOA guidelines. We pored over the documents, looking for any potential violations that Brenda might be committing. It was a tedious process, but we were determined to find something. Finally, after hours of searching, Emily let out a whoop of triumph. "I found it," she exclaimed. "Brenda's been using the community sprinkler system to water her lawn, even though she's only supposed to use it for the common areas." "Are you serious?" I said, incredulous. "I'm serious," Emily said, pointing to a clause in the HOA guidelines. "It's right here in black and white. She's been diverting water from the community supply to her own property." This was it. This was our ammunition. We had found Brenda's dirty little secret. "Okay," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "Time to expose HOA Karen for the hypocrite she is." The plan was set. We would reveal Brenda's water theft at the next HOA meeting. We would present our evidence to the other neighbors and let them decide whether she was fit to be president of the HOA. The stage was set for a showdown. And I had a feeling Brenda wasn't going to see it coming. The night before the HOA meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the past few weeks in my head: Brenda's audacious request, my Jello-filled pool, her furious reaction, the threatening letter, our discovery of her water theft. It was all so surreal. I knew Brenda would come to the meeting armed with her own arsenal of complaints and accusations. She would try to paint me as a rogue homeowner, a menace to the community, a Jello-obsessed lunatic. But I was ready for her. I had my own ammunition. And I had Sarah and Emily by my side. The next morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly calm. I took a deep breath, put on my most professional-looking outfit, and headed to the community center for the HOA meeting. As I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was staring at me, whispering to each other. Brenda was sitting at the head of the table, her face a mask of disapproval. She looked like she was ready for war. I took a seat near the back of the room, next to Sarah and Emily. They gave me a reassuring smile. "Ready to rumble?" Sarah whispered. "Born ready," I said, grinning. The meeting started with the usual formalities. Brenda droned on about landscaping regulations, parking restrictions, and noise complaints. I tried to pay attention, but it was hard to focus. I knew the real fireworks were about to begin. Finally, Brenda cleared her throat and said, "Now, I'd like to address a more serious matter. A matter that concerns the well-being of our entire community." She paused for dramatic effect, then turned her gaze directly on me. "As you all know," she continued, "Ms. Narrator's last name, has taken it upon herself to fill her swimming pool with Jello." A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the neighbors looked shocked, others looked amused, and a few looked downright confused. "This is not only an eyesore," Brenda continued, her voice rising in pitch, "but it's also a safety hazard. What if a child were to wander onto her property and fall into the Jello? They could drown." "That's ridiculous," I said, interrupting her. "The Jello is only a few feet deep. A child wouldn't drown." "That's not the point," Brenda shrieked. "The point is, this is a violation of community standards. It's unsightly, it's inappropriate, and it needs to be removed immediately." "I disagree," I said, calmly. "I don't believe my Jello-filled pool violates any HOA rules. And I have no intention of removing it." Brenda's face turned red with anger. "You're being defiant," she yelled. "You're being disrespectful. You're being gelatinous." "Gelatinous?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Is that even an insult?" The room erupted in laughter. Even a few of Brenda's supporters couldn't help but crack a smile. Brenda was furious. She slammed her fist on the table, making the water glasses jump. "I've had enough," she screamed. "I'm calling for a vote. All those in favor of demanding that Ms. Narrator's last name, drain her Jello-filled pool, say aye." A few hesitant aye votes were heard. But they were drowned out by a chorus of nays. Brenda looked stunned. She couldn't believe that her authority was being challenged. "Very well," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Then I have no choice but to take further action. I'm reporting you to the HOA Compliance Committee. They will investigate this matter and determine what further steps need to be taken." "That's your prerogative, Brenda," I said, shrugging. "But before you do, I have a little something I'd like to share with the rest of the community." I stood up, took a deep breath, and prepared to unleash my secret weapon. The truth about Brenda's water theft. The moment of truth had arrived. "Before we move on," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the community center, "I'd like to bring up a matter of my own. A matter that concerns the ethical conduct of our HOA president." Brenda's eyes narrowed. She clearly had no idea what was coming. "It has come to my attention," I continued, "that Mrs. Brenda Miller has been diverting water from the community sprinkler system to water her own lawn. This is a clear violation of Section 3.2, subsection B of the HOA guidelines, which specifically states that the community sprinkler system is to be used solely for the common areas." I paused for effect, letting my words sink in. A gasp rippled through the room. Everyone was staring at Brenda, waiting for her response. Brenda's face was ashen. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I have evidence to support my claim," I said, holding up a copy of the HOA guidelines and a series of photographs that Sarah had taken of Brenda's sprinkler system. "These photos clearly show that Mrs. Miller has been using the community water supply to irrigate her personal property." The room was silent. Everyone was waiting for Brenda to deny the accusations. But she didn't. She just sat there, speechless. Finally, Mr. Peterson, the neighbor who had been cited for parking his truck on the street, spoke up. "Is this true, Brenda?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Have you really been stealing water from the community? Brenda finally found her voice. It's not stealing, she said, her voice trembling. I was just supplementing the water supply. My lawn was looking a little dry. Supplementing? I said, raising an eyebrow. You were stealing water, Brenda. And you knew it was wrong. The other neighbors started to chime in, expressing their outrage and disappointment. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had been warned about her rose bush, accused Brenda of hypocrisy. Mr. Johnson, the neighbor who had been cited for having blinking Christmas lights, demanded that Brenda resign as president of the HOA. The meeting descended into chaos. Everyone was talking at once, arguing and shouting. Brenda was completely overwhelmed. She tried to defend herself, but no one was listening. Finally, Mr. Davis, the HOA vice president, stood up and banged his gavel on the table. Order! Order, he shouted. We need to calm down and discuss this like adults. He turned to Brenda and said, Brenda, these are serious accusations. I think it would be best if you step down as president of the HOA, at least temporarily, until we can investigate this matter further. Brenda looked like she was about to cry. She stood up, gathered her belongings, and stormed out of the room. As she walked out, she glared at me and hissed, You haven't won, narrator's last name. This isn't over. I just smiled and watched her go. The reign of HOA Karen was finally over. At least for now. The meeting adjourned shortly after Brenda's departure. As I walked out of the community center, I was greeted by a chorus of congratulations from my neighbors. They thanked me for standing up to Brenda and for exposing her hypocrisy. Sarah and Emily gave me a high five. You were amazing. Sarah said. You totally took her down. Thanks, I said, smiling. But it wasn't just me. We all did it together. As I drove home, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The battle with Brenda was finally over. And I had won. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw something that made my heart sink. A group of children were standing around my Jello-filled pool, staring at it with wide eyes. Oh. This was going to be interesting. As I got closer, I could hear the children giggling and pointing at the pool. They were clearly fascinated by the giant, jiggly mass of Jello. Wow, look at that, one of the kids exclaimed. It's like a giant dessert. Can we swim in it? Another one asked. I don't know, I said, approaching the group. It's not exactly water, you know. It's Jello. But it looks so cool, one of the girls said, her eyes wide with wonder. Can we just touch it? I hesitated for a moment. I hadn't really thought about what would happen after I filled the pool with Jello. I had been so focused on getting back at Brenda that I hadn't considered the consequences. Okay, I said finally. You can touch it. But no swimming, okay? It's not safe. The children squealed with delight and rushed towards the pool. They reached out and poked the Jello, giggling as it jiggled and wobbled. It's so sticky, one of the boys said. It smells like strawberries, another one exclaimed. I watched them play for a few minutes, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over me. At least someone was enjoying my Jello masterpiece. But then, I saw something that made my heart sink. Chad, Brenda's son, was walking towards the pool. He looked just as stunned as his mother had when she first saw it. What the? He muttered, staring at the Jello-filled pool. The children stopped playing and stared at Chad, their faces filled with apprehension. What's going on here? Chad asked, his voice stern. What are you kids doing? We're just looking at the Jello, one of the boys said timidly. Jello? Chad said, his voice rising in pitch. What Jello? He walked closer to the pool and peered inside. His face turned red with anger. Who did this? He demanded. Who filled this pool with Jello? The children pointed at me. Chad turned to me, his eyes blazing. "Did you do this?" he asked, his voice trembling with rage. "Did you fill this pool with Jello?" "Yes, I did," I said, standing my ground. "Is there a problem?" "A problem?" Chad shrieked. "This is a disaster. My wedding is tomorrow. And you've ruined everything." "How did I ruin anything?" I asked, feigning innocence. "I'm not the one who decided to have a wedding in a backyard with no pool. But my mother wanted to use your pool," Chad said, his voice cracking with desperation. "She wanted the guests to be able to swim." "I told you I wasn't comfortable with that," I said. "That's why I filled it with Jello." Chad was beyond reason. He started ranting and raving about how selfish and inconsiderate I was. He accused me of trying to sabotage his wedding. He threatened to call the police. I just stood there, listening to him rant, feeling a mixture of amusement and pity. Chad was clearly under a lot of stress. His wedding was tomorrow, and his mother had just been ousted as president of the HOA. He was probably feeling overwhelmed. Finally, he ran out of steam. He stood there, panting and red-faced, glaring at me with pure hatred. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "You're going to pay for what you've done." And with that, he stormed off, presumably to tell his mother about the latest development. I watched him go, shaking my head. This was getting out of hand. I had originally intended the Jello pool as a harmless prank, a way to get back at Brenda for her petty HOA complaints. But now, it was turning into a full-blown neighborhood feud. I had a feeling things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. The day of Chad's wedding dawned bright and sunny. I woke up to the sound of hammering and loud music coming from Brenda's house. It sounded like they were scrambling to get everything ready for the big event. I decided to stay inside and avoid any further confrontations with Brenda or Chad. I watched movies, read a book, and tried to ignore the chaos that was unfolding just a few houses down. But then, around midday, I heard a knock on my door. I peeked through the peephole and saw Brenda standing there, her face a mask of fury. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to open the door. I knew I couldn't hide forever. "What do you want, Brenda?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I want you to empty that pool," she shrieked, her voice shaking with anger. "I want you to empty it right now." "I'm not going to empty my pool, Brenda," I said, standing my ground. "It's my property, and I can do whatever I want with it." "But it's ruining Chad's wedding," she wailed. "The guests are laughing at us. They're taking pictures of the Jello pool and posting them online. It's a complete embarrassment." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, trying to suppress a smile. "But it's not my fault you decided to have a wedding in a backyard with no pool." "But you knew I wanted to use your pool," she screamed. "You knew it. And you did this on purpose to sabotage my son's wedding." "Brenda," I said, sighing, "I told you I wasn't comfortable with your guests using my pool. That's why I filled it with Jello. It's my property, and I can do whatever I want with it." "This isn't fair," she sobbed. "You're being so mean. You're ruining my son's special day." "I'm not trying to be mean, Brenda," I said, feeling a flicker of sympathy for her. "But you can't just expect to use my property for your own purposes. I have a right to enjoy my own home in peace." "But it's just for one day," she pleaded. "Please, just empty the pool. For Chad." "I'm sorry, Brenda," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not going to empty the pool. The Jello is staying." Brenda's face twisted with rage. "You're a monster," she shrieked. "You're a terrible person. I hate you." And with that, she burst into tears and ran back to her house. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of guilt and satisfaction. I knew I had hurt Brenda. I knew I had ruined her son's wedding. But I also knew that I had stood up for myself. I had protected my property. And I had finally put an end to Brenda's reign of terror. I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The battle was over. But the war was far from won. I had a feeling Brenda would be back. And next time, she would be even more determined to get her way. I just hoped I was ready for her. Because I had a feeling things were about to get a lot stickier. And a lot more complicated. Despite Brenda's dramatic exit, the wedding continued. I could still hear the music and the laughter coming from her house. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard. I kept wondering if I had done the right thing. Had I gone too far? Was it really necessary to fill my pool with Jello? I decided to call Sarah and Emily. I needed their reassurance. "Hey," I said, when Sarah answered the phone. "It's me." "Hey, what's up?" she asked. "Everything okay?" "I don't know," I said. "I just had another confrontation with Brenda. She came over and demanded that I empty the pool. She was really upset. I'm starting to feel guilty." "Guilty?" Sarah said, her voice incredulous. "Why would you feel guilty? She's the one who started this whole thing. She tried to bully you into letting her wedding guests use your pool." "I know," I said. "But I still feel bad. It's her son's wedding day. I don't want to ruin it." "You're not ruining it," Emily said, chiming in from the background. "She's ruining it. She's the one who's being unreasonable. You have every right to do whatever you want with your own property." "That's true," I said. "But still." "Listen," Sarah said, "Brenda is a bully. She's used to getting her way by intimidating people. You stood up to her. You showed her that she can't just walk all over you. That's something to be proud of." "Yeah," Emily said. "And besides, the Jello pool is hilarious. It's the best revenge ever." I laughed. "I guess you're right," I said. "It is pretty funny." "Exactly," Sarah said. "Don't let Brenda make you feel guilty. You did nothing wrong. You defended your property. You stood up for yourself. And you created a Jello masterpiece in the process." "Okay," I said, feeling a little better. "You've convinced me. I'm not going to feel guilty anymore." "Good," Sarah said. "Now, go enjoy your day. Watch a movie, read a book, maybe even take a dip in the Jello pool." "I don't know about the Jello pool," I said, laughing. "But I will try to enjoy my day." "That's all we ask," Sarah said. "And if Brenda gives you any more trouble, just give us a call. We'll be right over with reinforcements." "Thanks, guys," I said. "I appreciate it." I hung up the phone feeling much better. Sarah and Emily were right. I had nothing to feel guilty about. I had defended my property. I had stood up to a bully. And I had created a Jello masterpiece. I decided to take their advice and try to enjoy the rest of the day. I put on a movie, made some popcorn, and tried to relax. But as I sat there, watching the movie, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I kept thinking about Brenda and Chad. I kept wondering if I had gone too far. Maybe I should have just let them use my pool for the wedding. Maybe it would have been easier than all this. But then I remembered Brenda's entitlement. I remembered her threats. I remembered all the petty HOA complaints. And I knew that I had made the right decision. I had to stand up to her. I had to protect my property. I had to show her that she couldn't just walk all over me. And if that meant filling my pool with Jello, then so be it. I was done feeling guilty. I was done second-guessing myself. I had made my choice. And I was going to stick with it. The Jello was staying. And Brenda was just going to have to deal with it. As the afternoon wore on, I started to notice something strange. Neighbors were stopping by my house, one by one, to offer their support. Mrs. Henderson, the one with the overgrown rose bush, brought me a plate of cookies. "I just wanted to tell you that I think you're very brave," she said. "Brenda's been bullying us for years. It's about time someone stood up to her." Mr. Peterson, the one with the truck, gave me a thumbs up as he drove by. "Keep fighting the good fight," he shouted. Even Mr. Johnson, the one with the blinking Christmas lights, came over to express his support. "I always hated those static lights," he whispered conspiratorially. "Thank you for sticking it to her." As each neighbor shared their story, I realized that I wasn't alone. Everyone in the neighborhood had a Brenda story. Everyone had been subjected to her petty rules and her overbearing personality. And everyone was secretly thrilled that someone had finally challenged her authority. Mrs. Davis, the HOA vice president's wife, told me about the time Brenda had tried to fine her for having a slightly mismatched welcome mat. She said it didn't comply with the community aesthetic, Mrs. Davis said, rolling her eyes. "Can you believe that?" Mr. Garcia, the new neighbor who had just moved in last month, told me about the time Brenda had sent him a notice because his lawn wasn't green enough. She said it was a blight on the neighborhood, Mr. Garcia said, shaking his head. "I've only been here for a month. Give me a break." Even the mailman, who had overheard some of the conversations, chimed in. "That Brenda," he said, shaking his head. "She's always complaining about something. Always has to have things her way." As I listened to their stories, I started to feel a sense of community that I had never felt before. We were all in this together. We were all victims of Brenda's tyranny. And now, we were all united against her. The wedding music continued to blare from Brenda's house, but it didn't bother me as much anymore. I knew that I had the support of my neighbors. And that made all the difference. As the sun began to set, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I wanted to see for myself what everyone was saying about the wedding. As I walked past Brenda's house, I could see that the party was in full swing. People were laughing, dancing, and drinking. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But then, I noticed something that made me smile. A group of children had gathered at the edge of my property, staring at the Jello-filled pool. They were pointing, giggling, and taking pictures with their phones. I walked over to them and said, "Hey, guys. What are you doing?" "We're looking at the Jello pool," one of the kids said, his eyes wide with excitement. "It's so cool." "Yeah," another one said. "It's the best wedding decoration ever." I laughed. "I'm glad you like it," I said. "Can we touch it?" one of the girls asked. "Sure," I said. "But no swimming, okay? It's still not safe." The children squealed with delight and rushed towards the pool. They reached out and poked the Jello, giggling as it jiggled and wobbled. As I watched them play, I realized that I had created something truly special. Something that had brought joy and laughter to the neighborhood. Something that had united us against a common enemy. The Jello pool wasn't just a prank. It was a symbol of our rebellion. It was a sign that we were no longer going to be bullied by Brenda. And that, I realized, was worth all the Jello in the world. The wedding festivities continued late into the night. I could hear the music and the laughter fading as the hours passed. Eventually, everything quieted down, and I was finally able to get some sleep. The next morning, I woke up to a knock on my door. I peeked through the peephole and saw Mr. Davis, the HOA vice president, standing there. He looked serious. I opened the door and said, "Good morning, Mr. Davis. What can I do for you?" "Good morning, narrator's last name," he said. "I wanted to talk to you about the situation with Brenda and the Jello pool." "Okay," I said, bracing myself for another confrontation. "First of all," he said, "I want to apologize for Brenda's behavior. She's been under a lot of stress lately, and she hasn't been acting like herself." "I understand," I said. "But she still tried to bully me into letting her wedding guests use my pool." "I know," he said. "And that was wrong. You have every right to do whatever you want with your own property." "Thank you," I said. Secondly, he continued, I want to assure you that the HOA is not going to take any action against you. We understand that you were simply defending your property, and we don't believe that you violated any rules. Really? I said, surprised. Even with the Jello? Even with the Jello, he said, smiling slightly. In fact, I think it's rather creative. And it's certainly gotten everyone's attention. I laughed. I guess it has, I said. Finally, he said, I wanted to ask you if you would be willing to consider removing the Jello from your pool. Now that the wedding is over, it's not really serving any purpose, and it could become a health hazard. I thought about it for a moment. The Jello pool had served its purpose. It had protected my property. It had stood up to Brenda. And it had brought joy to the neighborhood children. Okay, I said finally. I'll remove the Jello. But I'm going to need some help. Consider it done, Mr. Davis said, smiling. I'll organize a group of volunteers to come over this afternoon and help you clean it up. Thank you, Mr. Davis, I said. I appreciate that. You're welcome, he said. And thank you for standing up to Brenda. You did the right thing. He shook my hand and walked away. I closed the door, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The HOA was on my side. The Jello pool was coming down. And the war with Brenda was finally over. Or so I thought. Later that afternoon, as I was preparing to start cleaning up the Jello pool, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it and saw Brenda standing there, her face pale and drawn. Can I talk to you for a minute? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to let her in. I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. What do you want, Brenda? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. I just wanted to apologize, she said, her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry for the way I've been acting. I was wrong to try to bully you. I was wrong to threaten you. I was just so stressed out about the wedding, and I let my emotions get the best of me. I understand, I said, feeling a flicker of sympathy for her. I also wanted to thank you, she continued. For exposing my water theft. I know it was wrong, and I'm going to make things right. I'm going to resign from the HOA, and I'm going to pay back all the water I stole. I appreciate that, Brenda, I said. I just hope you can forgive me, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. I forgive you, Brenda, I said, smiling slightly. Everyone makes mistakes. Thank you, she said, wiping away her tears. That means a lot to me. She turned to leave, but then she stopped and said, one more thing. The kids really loved the Jello pool. They said it was the best part of the wedding. I laughed. I'm glad they enjoyed it, I said. Me too, she said, smiling slightly. Me too. And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. The war with Brenda was finally over. And in the end, we had both learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the best way to win a fight is to simply let it go. While Brenda's apology was sincere, and Mr. Davis was proving to be a reasonable replacement, the wedding day itself hadn't been entirely without its chaotic moments, mostly thanks to the siren call of 5,000 gallons of brightly colored Jello. It started subtly. A few curious kids, emboldened by their earlier visit, started sneaking peeks over the fence. Then, a few braver souls started edging closer, drawn in by the shimmering, jiggly goodness. At one point, I looked out my window and saw a group of teenagers, Chad's younger cousins, I guessed, attempting to build a makeshift ladder out of lawn chairs to get a better view. I quickly shooed them away, reminding them that it wasn't safe. But the lure of the Jello pool was too strong. Later in the afternoon, as the wedding reception was in full swing, I heard a commotion outside. I peeked through the curtains and saw something that made me burst out laughing. Two of Chad's groomsmen, clearly fueled by liquid courage, had stripped down to their underwear and were attempting to climb into the Jello pool. They were slipping and sliding, covered in sticky goo, as they struggled to make their way over the edge. One of them lost his balance and landed headfirst in the Jello, emerging with a face full of strawberry-flavored gelatin. His friend doubled over with laughter, pointing and shouting, "You look like a giant gummy bear." I quickly ran outside and yelled at them to get out of the pool. "This isn't a playground," I shouted. "You're going to get hurt." They reluctantly climbed out of the pool, leaving a trail of sticky footprints behind them. They were covered in Jello from head to toe, and their underwear was stained with every color of the rainbow. As they stumbled back towards Brenda's house, I could hear the wedding guests erupting in laughter. Even Chad, who had been looking grim all day, couldn't help but crack a smile. I shook my head and went back inside, feeling a mixture of amusement and exasperation. The Jello pool had definitely disrupted the wedding. But it had also provided some much-needed comic relief. And it wasn't just the groomsmen who were drawn to the Jello pool. Throughout the day, I saw kids, teenagers, and even a few adults sneaking over to touch the Jello, take pictures, and even sample a little taste. The Jello pool had become a tourist attraction, a symbol of our neighborhood's rebellion against Brenda's tyranny. It was a reminder that even in the most stressful situations, there's always room for a little bit of fun. As Mr. Davis and the volunteers began to arrive to help clean up the pool, I couldn't help but smile. The Jello pool may have been a temporary disruption, but it had brought our neighborhood together in a way that nothing else ever could. And that, I realized, was a pretty sweet ending to a very sticky situation. Cleaning up the Jello pool was a monumental task, but with the help of my neighbors, we managed to get it done in a few hours. We used buckets, shovels, and even a shop vac to remove the sticky goo from the pool and the surrounding area. By the end of the day, my pool was sparkling clean again, and my backyard was back to normal. The only evidence of the Jello pool was a faint fruity smell that lingered in the air. As I stood there, admiring my clean pool, I couldn't help but smile. I had gone through a lot in the past few weeks, but I had come out on top. I had stood up to Brenda, I had protected my property, and I had brought my neighborhood together. And I had created a Jello masterpiece. Life in the neighborhood gradually returned to normal. Mr. Davis took over as president of the HOA, and he proved to be a fair and reasonable leader. He listened to everyone's concerns, and he made decisions that were in the best interests of the community. Brenda resigned from the HOA and faded into the background. She was still around, but she was much more subdued. She no longer sent out petty emails or tried to enforce ridiculous rules. She seemed to have learned her lesson. I even saw her a few times, walking around the neighborhood, smiling and waving to people. She seemed genuinely remorseful for her past behavior. As for Chad, he and his new wife moved out of Brenda's house and into their own place. I never saw them again, but I heard that they were doing well. And me? I went back to enjoying my peaceful life in my little slice of heaven. I spent hours floating in my pool, watching the clouds drift by, and pretending I was on vacation. But every now and then, when I was feeling particularly stressed or overwhelmed, I would remember the Jello pool. I would remember the laughter, the chaos, and the sense of community that it had created. And I would smile. Because sometimes, the best way to deal with a bully is to fill your pool with Jello. And sometimes, the sweetest taste of victory is a little bit of fruity, jiggly goodness. The end. Or is it? Maybe next time, I'll fill it with pudding.